Hey guys, how you doing? This is ا.معتز of Ismail speaking. Welcome back to our lectures. Today we're gonna talk about chapter number 13. Does practice make perfect? This is a good question to start this lecture, and we will go very fast to the what is meant by practice in e-learning. As you can see here, effective e-learning engages learners with instructional content. So once there is engagement of learners inside the context, it is actually called effective learning. And it fosters the selection, organization, integration, and the transfer of new knowledge. Right? So the purpose of having a practice is to foster the knowledge, foster new knowledge. Well, first, the learner's attention must be drawn to the important information and in the training. Attention. First one is attention. Then the learner must integrate the instructional words and visuals and instructions, integration of visual words and visuals to the prior knowledge. Finally, the new knowledge and skills are built in the learner's long-term memory, and that's what we're actually looking for. All right. As we have here, we have the practice exercises should fall into quadrant 4 for the engagement metrics, right? Behaviorally and mentally active. Behaviorally, the behavior of the students, the attention and instructions and the knowledge and everything, and mentally, it has to foster and promote to make the mentality works inside the student's brain, right? So it has to be here high with high. That is actually the importance of having the practice. We can see here formats of e-learning. We have e-learning practice interactions. We use formats similar to these used in the classroom, such as selecting the correct answer. So we have here the correcting answer, multiple choice, checking a box to indicate whether the statement true or false, and even typing short answers. Other instructions use format that are unique to computers, such as drag and drop, right? So format of e-learning practice, again, it is choose the correct answer, multiple choice, true or false, and drag and drop and touch screen. Some e-learning is termed as high engagement because the environment is highly interactive. The more interaction between the student and the application or the online teaching, the better for learning. Problem-based learning, if you give a problem to students and the students will be working day and night in order to find a solution for this, stimulations and games are three examples of high engagement. Three examples of high engagement in e-learning. In lower engagement, lessons, tutorials may provide information interspersed with questions. So when I actually view information and then give questions, this is called low engagement. But when I give a problem and the students have to work so hard in order to find the solutions and give simulation and games, it is called high engagement. What are some guidelines you can apply to create high-screen interactive multimedia learning environments? Principle number one, add sufficient practice interactions to e-learning to achieve the objectives. More practice to achieve objective. Principle two, mirror the job. You have to bring all what the students need inside the job in order to have a better understanding for the environment, future environment I'm gonna work in as a job. If you're teaching about how you can mend a car, then you have to provide the students with the environment of mending a car. You have to mirror it. Provide effective feedback. You have to give feedback all the time in order for students to understand what is right and what is wrong for them. What mistakes did they do in order to have these things for them. Principle 4, distribute and mix practice among learning events. You have to mix between practices. And then apply multimedia principles. I think we have discussed that earlier. Right, number one, how to add sufficient practice interactions. If you read this passage, you will definitely find two groups assigned were given. Study a full practice version lesson with 174 information screens and 66 practice exercises. So they give information and then later on they give exercises, right? Or a lean practice version with the same information and they give like a lot of questions, practices and exercises and questions. Participants were divided into high and low ability group. So we divided the clever students and the low achiever students based on their grade point averages and randomly assigned to complete either the full or lean questions, practice questions. Outcomes included scores on 52 question tests and average time to complete each version. Right, let's see the difference between the two groups. The ability level, low and high, 66 practices, 22 practices. Test scores, you see the difference. The high got more questions, that got more grades. And time to complete, there's a big difference in a shorter time, the longer time. And the low and high, the practices were very close, which actually results that higher ability learners scored higher and full version took longer to complete. The full practice, that's what I'm looking for. The full practice version resulted in higher average scores. This is very important. The full practice version resulted in higher average score with an effect size of 45. So the more practice you have, the more grades you will be. That's why practice makes perfect. And also the full practice version resulted in increased learning for both higher and lower ability learners. Both of them, when they practiced more, they got more results and better grades. Right. Then the author of this book and those who did the experiment concluded one thing. When instructional designers are faced with uncertainty about the practice to include, they should favor a great amount of practice. They have to put more practice over a relatively small amount if higher students' achievement is an important goal. So that is, if you actually want to design anything that helps students in their achievement, then it has to be having more practice than anything else. If your goal is to build knowledge, and this is crucially important, and skills, you need to add practice into actions. So you have to make your practice very interactive with the students. To decide how much practice your e-learning courses should include, consider the nature of the job. The nature of the job decides how much practice you have. If it is mechanical, then you have a lot of practice. If it's speaking skill, then you have a lot of practice, right? And the criticality of job performance to determine whether the extra training time is justified by the improvements in learning. Principle 2, mirror the job. Mirror the job. That is, you need to create transfer appropriate interactions. You have to make the same exact job environment inside the classroom environment. So you have to move everything around there using pictures, videos, and all that stuff. And then the principle number 3 is to provide effective feedback. You have to give the students effective feedback in order to understand what mistakes did they do in order to avoid them later or in the future. Right? We have 4 categories of feedback here. It is given to you in order to make it a little bit easier for you. Task-focused feedback, such as the Excel feedback, you can see it in figure 13.8. Process feedback. So the number 1, it has to do with the task that you give, the exercise that you give. Process feedback that provides suggestions on strategies and cues for successful responses. So you have to give them a kind of suggestions to help them. Then self-regulation feedback that guides learner to monitor and reflect on their responses. So they should have questions that can reflect their answers. Echo-directed feedback such as praise. You have to tell them that they have done a good job, they're doing excellent, smart students, and so on and so forth. Such kind of feedback will help understand or better off their learning. You can see the 4 types here and how that feedback works, and it gives you an example here. For the one that has to do with tasks, you can give profiles likely to include a healthy percentage of obesity without diabetes. So you can give a kind of profiles. For the process, you can actually have a practice in a ruler setting. You can send people to practice as we send students inside the schools to practice their own teaching. Self-regulation, correct assessment. You have to provide correct assessment, and ego, it actually saying words like great work, well done, you did a good job. All of these words will help to improve the ego of the learners and consequently the learning itself. You have also tips for feedback here. After the learner responds to questions, provide feedback. Tell him whether the answer is correct or incorrect, and you have to give the explanation. Focus the explanation and the feedback on the task itself, right? Avoid feedback such as well done that draws attention to the ego and away from the task. Avoid normative feedback such as grades that encourage learners to compare themselves with others. Emphasize progress feedback in which attention is focused on improvement over time. You have to position the feedback on the screen so the learners can see the questions. So you have to give the question and the answers on screen. For multi-step problems for which steps are interdependent, provide step-by-step feedback. So you have a questions and then you have like 5 points. Every single point you have to provide feedback. Regarding the multiple answers, show the correct answers next to the learner's answers. So you have to show the learner's answers, and then you have to show the correct answers. Lastly, to provide training and guidance for reviewers assigned to provide a peer feedback. Peer feedback is a student's feedback. It's a group feedback from the students. The principle number 4 is to distribute and mix practice among learners. Here you can have something that they call it spacing effect, that practice sessions spaced in time are superior to mass practices in terms of long-term retention. This is actually appears to hold for verbal materials of all types as well as for motor skills. Lastly, principle 5, apply multimedia principles. And I think we have discussed that before, but we're going to go back very fast here. Is refer back to the directions and the questions as well as to the feedback. So you have to tell the students to read the questions very carefully before they start answering their questions. Recommend you generally present practice interactions along with the continuous feedback. Contiguity, text should be closely aligned to the graphics, as we said before, graphics explaining to minimize cognitive load. No more information, no load of information, only graphics that can help him understand the lesson. Coherence principle, well, the cohesion and coherence in writing, the same thing here, but the violation of coherence principle imposes enormous cognitive load and may interfere with learning. So we give a lot of information and they're not coherent, then the students have confusion and they will not understand what's going on, then they have to read from there and that, from here and there, in order to understand what is going on, and this is going to be a load of information. So we recommend that the practice opportunities be free of visual or audio elements, and such as animations, sounds, and so on and so forth. What to look for in e-learning? This is actually a kind of summary for the whole things. Job relevant, overt response practices questions. Feedback that only tells the respondent whether the answer is correct or incorrect, with explanation. Explanatory feedback that focuses on the task or on the task process. Feedback that minimizes praises comments such as well done. Peer feedback, group feedback, friends feedback that includes pertaining for viewers on how to apply checklist and over suggestions for the improvement. Also, the number of practice opportunities has the critically reflects the critically of the job skills and needed for automaticity. Practice exercises are distributed through the learning. You have to distinguish about the categories of problem, practice interactions. You have to practice exercise that minimize cognitive load, no information. By applying appropriate multimedia principles, use relevant visuals, give feedback located to the responses, use audio to give feedback, avoid split attention with response format, avoid sounds or either distractions. Okay, thank you so much. This is one thing to mention before we end this lecture. You have to focus mainly on this, what to look for in e-learning. This is very important and summarizes the whole chapter. All right, if you have any questions, please try to contact me as soon as possible and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much and see you next time.